Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell movement.
Welcome to the Powell movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and this week marks 3 weeks into school, and we received the dreaded email saying that someone in my kid's class tested positive for COVID. What does that mean for me? Right now, absolutely nothing. Our kids are masked in school, and the protocol is things are business as usual until you get the dreaded phone call saying something else. So what I'm trying to say is absolutely nothing has changed in my world other than that concerning email and getting psyched for the ski season. TGR is in town this weekend, MSP will be here in a few weeks, and while I'm still hesitant to go to these crowded premieres, I'm gonna do it. I have to keep reminding myself I'm vaccinated and this is my job. On top of these premieres, the snowboard ones will be here in no time too, and I'm gonna go to them all. I hope you do as well so we can support part of the industry that really needs our support, the media. Without these movie tours, all we have is internet stuff, and that's just not the same thing. The feelings and the energy that these premieres generate get everyone stoked and ready for the season. And if you've never been to a premiere before, there's nothing better than being packed into a theater with a ton of like-minded people during COVID times. There's a really good chance that you're going to come home fine, and I'm going to be taking a risk too. I highly recommend you do it. And speaking of risk takers, Trennon Paynter is back for round 2 this week, and it's every bit as awesome as part 1. We talk about his Olympic experience, coaching the best in the world, the impact of Sarah, and so much more. Before we get into it, I want to thank my old friend Kevin Lewis for bringing me over some balance boards to kill some time with. I'm using them a lot. I also want to thank you for coming back each week. And I want to invite you to follow me on Instagram at The Powell Movement. Also, I'd love it if you told a friend who's into skiing and snowboarding about the podcast because it really helps it grow. And please, please, please support the amazing brands who make this thing happen. They are Dragon, Stanley, Alpine Vans, Rollerblade, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Now, let's talk to Trennon Paynter.
Yo, Mike.
How's it going, man?
Yeah, good, thanks. How are you?
I'm pretty good, thanks. You ready to jump into round 2?
Sure, bro. Let's just dive on in.
All right, man. So based on our last conversation and what I know about you, you are one of those dudes who lives adventure. And since we talked a few days ago, have you done anything radical?
Yes, I suppose I have by certain measures. I did go fly my hang glider off a new mountain for me that I'd never flown off before. Had an awesome flight, climbed out to about 8,000 feet, flew through some radical turbulence, which was giving us the lift to get up there, and had an awesome landing. So that was pretty radical. It was actually quite cool. I connected with this guy who's the national champion hang glider pilot. So I kind of flew a bunch in the 90s and then stopped for a while, and I've restarted. And one real interesting thing was one of the guys who was teaching me back then had a son who was a toddler at the time. And Ray, the guy who was teaching me at the time, he actually passed away, and I had heard about it. And then years and years later, I discover his son is now the national champion. So I got a hold of him, and that's who I went flying with a couple of days ago. And it was really cool because I had only met him when he was literally a toddler and his dad was teaching me. And now I show up and he's teaching me sort of as I restart flying again after a long break from it. It was both radical and really, really cool experience to do that and meet this guy.
Yeah, it's like full circle, and it's just another week in the life of Trennon Paynter, right? Like that's nothing crazy for you. It's just what you do.
Well, it's what I try to do. Yeah. You got to get out there and have some fun, right?
Yeah, for sure. And when we left off last time, you had gone to the World Cup while the whole new school movement was starting, but you had your foot in the door of the new school movement at one point. You had clips in Poor Boyz Productions' seminal movie 13. Did you know Johnny from Moguls and get into the movie through that relationship?
Somewhat. I actually don't believe I had ever met Johnny through Moguls, but the other guys did. So it was people like Mark McDonnell who had met Johnny, I believe, at some pro mogul events, because by then Mark had sort of moved from the amateur circuit into the pro circuit. At the time, there were all sorts of weird rules and it was hard to do both. So he had just decided to go full pro. He killed it. He won the pro tour. The guy's the man. And I think it was there where he met Johnny. And so those guys knew Johnny, and they did State of Mind and Degenerates, which were pre-13. And I think near the end of them doing Degenerates, I met them because those guys sort of introduced me to them. And at the end of Degenerates, I had a little clip, but then 13 was where I got a segment. You know, I got to share a cool punk rock song with Philou and JF Cousin, so I was in fine company, and I did a double backflip mute grab, which was maybe, I thought at the time, and still could be, the first, quote, grabbed double. So that was my little claim to fame, I suppose, in getting out there in the new squirrel world. So yeah, it was awesome. I loved it. But it was the challenge to try and do both, because I was still, at that time, quite focused on trying to make it even further in moguls and make it to the Olympics in particular. I'd finally made it up to getting a spot on the World Championships team, which at the time for Canada was essentially the same criteria as making the Olympic team. So I'm like, okay, hey, if this is 99 and I'm in on the top 4 Canadian group going to World Championships, if I can maintain this level or get better, then I'm going to the games in 2002, which was my target.
Back to the movie, though, what were the shoots like? Was it super loose? Because it's all pretty new. I mean, it's Johnny's third movie, like you said, and it's a different time. Like, are you guys on twin tips? Are you tinkering with skis? Are you putting those little slip covers on so you can land backwards? What's it all look like back then? Even though you're totally focused on moguls as well, but there is that time where you have your foot in both doors.
I don't know, it was awesome, right? Because no one really knew exactly what to do. Everyone's just figuring out as they went. And so, yes, twin tips were coming up. I'm not 100% certain, but I'm pretty sure most of my stuff in 13, I wasn't on twin tips. It actually took me a long time to figure out the switch stuff. I don't even know if I had anything switch in 13, to be honest. But I also think I was doing most of my stuff in 13 on a set of like 198 or 203 Dynastar 4x4s.
Okay.
They were great skis, man. They were built like a race ski. And I had a set of those, and I had a set of those Rossi Quad X. It was kind of like the special team edition. I loved big, huge, super stiff skis. Like, I went for the longest ones I could get, the biggest ones I could get, and the stiffest, because they were good and stable for going fast, which I always liked. So yeah, that double backflip mute grab, I was on these giant freaking skis. Like, they probably weighed more than double what the average park guy skis on these days.
Right.
So it took a little bit of energy to get them around.
Did you guys have any clue the movement was going to blow up back then, or do you kind of look at it as a novelty? And I'm sure that your vision and the other people's visions are different because you're on the Canadian team, so you actually have a direction. But like for those other guys, do they realize the movement's going to be something big, or is it just something they believe in and a lot of hope?
I feel like they probably did certainly have a better finger on the pulse and vision for where it was going to go. And also, they were the ones driving that bus. So they were making it happen as they went. And obviously, you're not going to make anything happen without a lot of passion for it and also a lot of belief in it. So I think those guys had that in spades, and they were literally changing the sport. So it was such a cool thing. And I was kind of coming in and out. So I just don't think I had the same level of focus on it as those guys who decided to make it their primary focus, right? They were able to devote all their time to it. So for me, it was more, these are my friends. What they're doing is really cool and awesome. I have a lot of fun when I go and mess around with that stuff with them, but I was on the fringe of it, and I didn't have the same kind of schedule that would allow me to sort of pursue it as often. Yeah, I don't know if I'm answering the question, but I remember for me, it was more every now and then I'd be like, oh, cool, I've got some time. And they're like, hey, we're doing a shoot. And it was almost a little bit of a tag along feeling.
Okay.
Which was fine. This is awesome, but it does take a pretty full-bodied effort to get to the level they were at. And I just was splitting my time. So yeah, it was funny for me because I think, as I said in the first episode, I had my own little bits of weird jealousy to a degree, because all of a sudden the industry shifted really rapidly to now they're like, hey, we don't care about traditional freestyle at all anymore. This is the new thing. This is what we're doing. And because I was still quite focused on the traditional side, I was sort of jealous and, that's what the heck, man, I'm doing good over here. And now you guys are pouring all your support into the people over there. So it was a funny time for me, but still an awesome one.
And I would say that none of it really matters, because right around then, 99-ish is when you blow up your pelvis, or 2000s when you blow up your pelvis. That means that you're not going to be focused on the moguls right then, or on twin tips, or anything, because you've got to get yourself back. And you do get yourself back. You come back from that injury. But where you have the spot on the World Cup team or you've got your Canadian national team spot, when you get hurt and you come back, do they hold that spot for you or do they give it away to a younger kid?
It was a little bit of both. So getting hurt really changed my trajectory in the sport in so many ways. So I got hurt, I broke my pelvis, and then I came back. And when I came back to the sport after breaking my pelvis, I still had a Canadian team spot. Man, I'm blanking on the exact timeline, but I know I did come back and ski again for Canada, the Canadian team, but I skied quite poorly. So my events coming back from that injury just sucked. All of it, I had been tracking upwards in the top 10 on the world and doing really well. Now all of a sudden I was hitting mid-20s kind of thing, and I wasn't at that level I had been. So in the Canadian program, which was at the time one of, if not the most competitive mogul teams on the planet, we had a ton of depth. And so it didn't take long for a couple bad results to sort of move me out of that position. And next thing you know, I was really sort of sitting in the midfield of the Canadian squad as opposed to that top group that I had been in before getting hurt. And I was looking like I was going to lose most of my funding because the funding is really tied to results. And since I did come back and ski, it was those results. That's what they were looking at for team selection and for funding. And so because I was slipping, all that was slipping too. So it was a real tough time for me because I had put so much into the sport and I felt like I was tracking so well. And then I got hurt and came back and it was just, oh God, I slipped and everything feels derailed. And I didn't know if I was going to be able to afford to keep going with the lack of funding that I had sort of started. I'd had a few years of A-team funding, which obviously makes a world of difference. And now I wasn't going to have that anymore. And I wasn't even shoe in for an Olympic team spot. I still was in the mix of probably 4 or 5 midfield guys that were all going to battle it out for that spot. But I wasn't up in that top 4 group like I had been before.
So it's not a sure thing. And that's the big goal, is to make the Olympic team in 2002. And I'm going to make the assumption that the chances of you making that team did exist. But if you're going to make the team, it's going to be really, 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 really hard to make the Canadian team. But since you were born in Australia, I'm guessing you might have citizenship. And is that kind of a secret backdoor that you've always had that maybe you never looked into?
Yes. I had known for a long time that was an opportunity. And in large part because the original coach of the Canadian mogul team, when I first got into the Canadian program and made the development team, the mogul coach, the guy, Steve Desevich, he was just a legendary figure. He was this unbelievably animated and sometimes aggressive coach, but he was the best out there and everyone wanted to ski for him. So I knew him from him being the head coach of the men's mogul team when I first got into the Canadian program. And since I had done some time on the road skiing in a taxi squad position, even before I made the World Cup team, I had trained with him and worked with him. And he got a job right around, it was probably 98 or something. He had switched and started to go coach for the Australian team. So when he did that, him and I, of course, we were all still at World Cup events. And so I would see him all the time. And he was aware that I had an Australian passport because I was born in Australia, Canadian parents. So I've always had both passports. And so he had mentioned a few times, hey, if you want to come ski for us, you should come ski for Australia. And so I did know that was an option in place for me. And yeah, probably about a year and a half out of the games. And I was in this position where things were looking to be a real challenge to see if I was going to be able to fund myself and make it through on the Canadian team. I had this opportunity to compete for Australia, given my passport. And it was quite an easy thing at the time because I had the passport. So I didn't have to go through a whole bunch of changing citizenship things, which some athletes have done as well. They've gone through some pretty complex operations to compete for another country. For me, it was as simple as show up, go to Australia for their winter, our summer, start from scratch as if I'm any other Australian kid in their program, compete in their events, qualify for their nationals, do well at their nationals, got selected for their World Cup team, and then qualified for the Olympics through those World Cup results. So I just jumped in as any Australian would have, given my citizenship. It was a funny thing for me, and it still is, to be honest.
Do you feel slimy taking a spot from someone who was born and raised in Australia, and then you come in and given you do it by the way that any Australian would do it, but it's easy for you? It's like you've almost lost a step in the Canadian world where you're getting older and you've been hurt and you're not as fast as you used to be, but then you can walk right into Australia and be one of the best in their country.
Do I feel slimy? I don't know if it went that far. And the comment around, did I take a spot from an Australian? That was actually something that I was pretty concerned about, and I didn't do that. What happened was the Olympic quota spots, countries can max out 4 athletes per gender per spot. And the criteria for qualifying for the Olympics was a certain standard of World Cup level results. In the end, there were only 2 of us that met that criteria, even though there were more Australians going for the team. So I didn't take an Olympic spot that would have gone to anyone else. Had I not been there, those other guys wouldn't have gone either, because the people that didn't go just didn't go purely because they didn't meet the criteria set by Australia. And that was quite important to me because, sort of as you said, had I jumped in and knocked some Australian guy who'd been working his own lifetime to get onto the team, and I came in and bumped him out of there and took his slot, that would have been slimy, man. And I'm not sure if I would have made the same decision knowing that I was doing something like that.
No, it sounds like you did it totally legit.
Yeah, so I'm glad I didn't do that. But still, for me, it was more the mixed feelings I have about doing that for me are a little more about, did I take the easy route to the games, knowing that I still had a chance in the Canadian system? It was just all of a sudden it went from, I'm sort of the guy who's probably going to go, to it's this massive uphill battle. And so I'm like, well, did I bail on the challenge and take the easy route? And how do I feel about myself for doing that? And I still have some weird feelings about all that, to be honest. I loved being able to go into the Australian system and how they treated me, and working with my old coach, and of course going to the games. All of that was just immensely gratifying and awesome. But I built my mogul career competing for Canada. I grew up in Canada. I learned to ski essentially in Canada, although my first day on skis was in Australia when I was 2 or something. But my ski career was tied to Canada, and certainly my mogul career was tied to Canada because that's the program I came up in, and that's the country I represented for 50 World Cups and a couple World Championships. So to switch last minute and do that is a thing that I always have a few little weird, sometimes I feel almost a little embarrassed. And I think in large part it's just because I wonder if I bailed on the challenge. And obviously I respect anyone who rises to the challenge. And I'm like, was that a case of me bailing on the challenge? I don't know. And perhaps it was.
I mean, it looks like you took the sure thing.
Yeah, it wasn't quite a sure thing, but it was certainly, I knew that what was required to make the Australian team seemed certainly, I guess, less challenging. I felt like, oh yeah, for sure, I can get these results. It was also, I remember at the time, someone asking me, they said, well, when it came to the games, they're like, so given your season you just had, would you have made the Canadian team? And I don't believe I would have. However, each country's selection was different. Australia, what you needed to do was finish I think it was in the top 20 a whole bunch of times. So you had to be really consistently in a top pretty big group. And that I achieved pretty quickly as soon as I started competing for them. And in fact, I earned my Olympic spot on my birthday, which was kind of cool.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. I needed one more result in the top 20, and the event was in Germany, and it was my birthday, and I stomped around and got it. And I was like, that's a cool birthday present for myself. Just gave myself a spot at the Olympics. But had I stayed with Canada, I would have been skiing with a different goal to qualify for the games. So it would have involved going harder, trying to get a couple really, really good results instead of trying to be very consistently solid results. So I would have approached the events differently. Would I have done it? Hard to say.
It's time for my first sponsor break, and now is the time to order your Alpine van. If you don't know about Alpine, well, they're the one-stop shop to get your Sprinter van and have it customized into your dream adventure van. And they are the best. Don't believe me? Go to their website, alpinevans.com, scroll down to the Cody Townsend 50 Project van video, and see the build detail and quality for yourself. Cody could have gone with anyone for his van build, but he chose Alpine because those guys are designers and engineers who double as ski patrollers, mountain bikers, and surfers who spend way too much time in the elements with all of their toys in their vans. They can have your van fully customized in your driveway in 90 days. So head on over to Alpine Vans, check out their thoughtful quote builder, and get yourself the best holiday present ever early. My next sponsor is Dragon, and I have been loving all the sunglasses Dragon sent over. Thanks, Liam. I'm a huge fan of all things that make me look better, and my sunglasses definitely make me look way cooler than I am. And they'll do that for you too. But what's even more crazy is that thanks to space-age technology, my sunglasses float in water, and their Luma lens creates the most vivid colors I've seen since I went to a Dead show. On top of all that, Dragon has supported action sports athletes like Mick Fanning, Chris Ben-Chetler, Danny Davis, Brian Iguchi, and many more since they started in a garage in 1993. And Dragon is making it easy for you to own a pair. All you need to do is head on over to dragonalliance.com, go shopping, and enter the code POWEL15, that's all one word, the number 15 with no spaces, and you will save 15% on your order. My final sponsor this break is Stanley. You know, the brand that invented the keep things hot and cold category back in 1913. Remember what your grandpa used to drink his hot coffee out of? That's a Stanley, and using one is more important than ever. If you're still using single-use plastics, you know, bottled water, you're blowing it. Your plastic is going to end up in our oceans, and that sucks. But you can change that, and Stanley wants to help you do that. And they're going to give you 30% off your plastic-saving water bottle and anything else you order on their website. To get the deal, head on over to stanley1913.com, go shopping, and enter the code DRINKFAST, that's all one word, all lowercase, at checkout, and you'll get 30% off. If your order is over $75, Stanley's going to send you a limited edition Powell Movement beanie to go on top of it. Those are my sponsors this round. Now, let's get back into the podcast. Well, I think it's easy to look back and say, I could have done it for Canada, but if you were to actually go that route and you didn't make it, you'd be kicking yourself for the rest of your life that you didn't go to the Olympics because you tried the harder route in going to Canada. You did go with Australia, and now there's that second guessing of like, oh, I could have done it with Canada. But really, you went the way that you've went, and you've been to the Olympics as an athlete. And that's amazing. I think you got like 25th place or something like that. And what's the highlight of the Olympic experience for you as an athlete?
Oh, man. I think just pulling into the start gate for the event and looking out at the stands. They had built this stadium of seating in the finish area, and it was up almost as high as the top of the mogul course. And so obviously that's something that we had never experienced in our sport.
30,000 people cheering?
Yeah, like we'd obviously had some big events. Some events were a lot more well attended than others, but to pull into the start gate, and I'm looking down the course between my tips, and it was a really gnarly, pretty epic course. Deer Valley's a badass mogul run. So I'm looking down between my tips at these moguls that I got to negotiate. And then my gaze sort of sweeps up through the finish area, and then there's these stands full of people almost up to eye level. And it was just so radical, man. I was like, holy shit, I can't believe this is happening. It's just awesome. That for me is the one thing that really sticks in my mind. Pulling into the gate, tips over the edge, put my poles down, look up. It's like, wow, look back down, and off we go. Yeah. And then I blew it. I made such a classic mistake in that damn event. The crux of the course was about 4 turns after you landed the top air. Back then, which I wish they would go back to be honest, they intentionally messed with the rhythm of the moguls when they were building the course. So you landed the top air and you had a few big spaced out bumps that, because you're going so fast when you land the air, you can negotiate some big spaced out turns well because they don't come at you as quick. I think you had maybe 3 or 4 of those, and then it just tightened up, like the pacing and the spacing of the moguls tightened up to almost you had to double time your turns to get through it. And that was the hardest part of the course. And that was where almost everyone struggled the most with really getting through it clean in training, myself included. And I hit the top air, did my signature mule kick twister spread, and landed with all the speed, bam, 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 hit those first 4 bumps. And then here comes the crazy tight shit. That's the hardest part. And boom, I get through it, right? And that was really the hardest part. And I completely allowed myself to reflect on that. I stopped thinking about what I was doing, and I gave myself this, oh, sweet, you made it through the hard. Oh, and as I'm thinking that, I stumble on an easy turn. And I was like, you idiot. It was such a classic sports psych 101. Pay attention to what you're doing, have your mind in the moment. And I didn't. I just let myself kind of think, oh, sweet, got it. And then the second I thought that, I wasn't paying attention to what I still needed to do. Stumbled, tripped up on about 3 turns, pulled it back together, bottom air, nailed it. Rest of the run was good, but that mistake was enough to just put me right out of finals. Now I'm in the finish area, again, having mixed emotions because, wow, it was cool to ski in the Olympics, but man, I'm pissed off that I kind of blew my run too. So yeah, that's sport, man.
Yeah. And when all is said and done with the Olympics, I don't know if you're hurt or if you take a year off in 2003, because it looks like you have 0 results. And then in 2004, it looks like there's 1 World Cup event. And then it looks like your mogul career is over.
That was funny.
How does it all end?
Well, it kind of ended with, I had dabbled in 1 or 2 pro events, maybe just 1, but actually that might have even been before I got hurt. And I was also dabbling in the new school stuff, and I had done some ski cross races. I was actually invited to the X Games ski cross because I'd won a couple big ski cross comps in other places, but then I got hurt and couldn't do that one. And right after the Olympics, I kind of finished up that season. And then I was like, oh, what now? Am I going to go do some ski cross races? Am I going to try and hook up with Mike D and the guys and get a little more into the freeride scene? Where am I going to go with it? And then I got a call from a friend of mine, Jay Vaughn, who we had been on the national team together, Moguls. He was coaching the Alberta freestyle team, and they were looking for another coach. It just came up that, hey, here's a coaching job that you should apply for. You could probably get it. You're fresh out of the Olympics. So obviously, that's going to help a lot. And I had done a bunch of coaching already at the summer camps, as all of us did back then. And I enjoyed it. I felt like I had a good time with it and a good record doing it. So I was like, yeah, okay, man, I'll take this job. So I took the job as the Alberta team coach, but I still really was into skiing myself. And that World Cup you're talking about, the one you referenced in 2004, now I'd been coaching for a year or two, the Alberta team. And I heard, hey, there's a World Cup mogul event coming to Fernie, BC. And I grew up in Kimberley, BC, which is an hour away from Fernie. Skied Fernie a bunch as a kid. I never missed an opening day for years and years and years. And I just remember thinking, oh my God, man, like, I wish I was still doing moguls because they had finally caught up somewhat in a rules sense, and people were allowed to do flips now,
Right.
which was sweet. It's like, thank God they finally at least got that far. And B, Fernie was an hour from my hometown.
It's like a home event for you.
Man, that would have been just a dream event for me. And then I started thinking, and I called the Australian Association. I was like, hey guys, are you filling all your spots for the Fernie World Cup? And they said, well, no, actually, we're not. We've got 1 or 2 guys there, but we have 3 spots. I said, well, you guys be down to let me compete? Give me a spot. I'm still in the FIS system, registered under Australia. If there's an empty spot that no one's going to use, I said, if there's any costs involved, I'll just pay it myself. I'd just really like to ski in that comp. It'd be really cool for me. They were great. They said, yeah, why not, man? It was awesome. Such a random thing, but they're like, sure, no problem. So I actually took the team that I was coaching at the time, which was all these little grommets, including future stars like Mike Riddle, and future new school icons like Chug Life Costco and the crew, Mike Hanatuk. It was an awesome team back then. It was all those guys when they were just tiny little kids, and we were doing everything, moguls, big air, park, all of it. I'm like, guys, we're going to Fernie World Cup, and I'm going to compete. So basically, I brought my own little team of kids as a cheering squad, essentially. And I got to compete in the Fernie World Cup with all my friends and family from home came. I got to do a backflip huntony on the bottom air, which was great because I was one of the guys who'd always been pissed off they didn't let us do whatever we wanted off the jumps. And finally I got to. I can't remember how I did, but I was kind of close to making finals, which was pretty funny.
You haven't been in it for a while?
I certainly hadn't been training any moguls, but I think I even had to borrow a pair of mogul skis to do it. But it was a really cool experience, man. And I'm so really grateful to the entire Australian program. You know, it's a bit of logistics work for them to enter someone in a World Cup, and they were accommodating with it. That was awesome, man. That was really cool.
So that's like your send-off from your World Cup career, pretty much, is that one, and you're able to have all your athletes with you and all your family with you, and it's a nice way to put the end of a career together right there with everyone there at your home resort almost.
Exactly. Such a cool send-off to a sport that definitely had all sorts of things that deserved criticism about it, but still gave me just many, many years of my life as a mogul skiing athlete was just incredible. Got so many cool experiences and really wouldn't trade it.
Then, while you're coaching this Alberta team, the team gets broken up into two sides where there's the mogul program and then there's the park and pipe kids, and they break it off and you end up on the park and pipe side.
That was a selfish move.
For you to do that?
It was purely selfish in that I knew if I took the park and pipe side, I'd get to ski more.
Okay.
Because mogul coaching by then was pretty much get to the course, maybe go through it with the athletes and help them inspect it. And then you sit there at the top or the bottom all day while they ski. Coaching the park and pipe team, especially at that time, was lapping the park with the kids. So I was just like, hell yeah, give me that job where I can still shred. It was so motivated by just wanting to keep skiing as much as I could, as opposed to sitting down and coaching all day.
Is it intimidating when you've got some supreme talent with these kids that are coming up who have rubber bones and aren't afraid to do anything? And then you're like the old coach, and you're not even that old by any means, but you're much older than these kids, and you have to follow them through the park, and they're throwing shit that you might have not even thought of throwing before in your entire life. And do you have to learn how to slide rails and learn how to ride pipe?
I did have to learn to slide rails for sure. I had hardly ever touched a rail before I started coaching that program. Rails had been around a bit, but initially I never got into them. I think I tried sliding a PVC pipe at summer camp and slipped out on my hip and was just like, fuck that.
Right.
I wanted nothing to do with it for the first few years. So now I'm coaching a team and I'm like, okay, I guess got to start sliding rails. So that was great because I started doing it and did it enough to actually become okay at it. And then I was like, oh, this is actually fun. I really enjoyed just huge gaps to rails.
Big disasters?
Yeah, I never did a ton of rail tricks. Like pretzel was the hardest thing in the world for me and stuff. But I'd just try and find a massive gap to a rail, do stuff like that. So yeah, I had to learn a lot of that stuff.
But that's high risk, high consequence too, if that's what you're looking for is gap to rails.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah. I had a huge ego, man. I always loved to show off. Like I said, the reason I became good at moguls was because I got good enough to show off under the chairlift. That probably still hasn't gone away. I'm still a bit of a egotistical show off when I get the chance. I'm well aware of that. And I was then too. So for me, I really enjoyed being this old guy who could still push in that area. And for years and years, I would always guinea the jumps for him.
That gets you respect.
I had a good sense of speed. And I'm like, hey guys, whenever we went somewhere new and there was a giant jump, I'd always be like, guys, let me go first, check it for speed. Yeah. So I'd guinea the jumps for him. And I didn't do a 900 until I was actually coaching that team. I'd never even gone that far back in my own early days of 13 and stuff.
And that's all like 30 plus age for you almost.
I think I was 35 when I did my first 9.
That's crazy, man.
Yeah. Yeah. I just remember I was like, give me the biggest jump I can find so I have as much time as possible to get this damn thing around. And yeah, I even entered a couple comps with them, because I was still kind of in my whatever midlife crisis and show off phase. So I remember taking the team to the World Ski Invitational and I signed up and did pipe with them.
That's so
we
funny.
all competed together. Yeah. I'm like, oh, I'm going to do this too, man.
I was probably there when you did that, which is pretty amazing too.
Yeah.
So you're the captain of the cool side of the Alberta team. And I'll say the cool side because park and pipe eventually became what was looked at as cool in skiing and still is at this point today, and Big Mountain as well. But the level of talent on that program, it sounds like it's almost too much for like the whole provincial or regional program thing that you guys had. Do you pretty much come to the realization that you have Riddle, Hayward, you have Roz, and they need more than what the team can give them, and that's when you start your own kind of traveling team?
Exactly. It was a real funny time in the sport. And for me, coming up through the traditional system, most of my own experience as an athlete coming up through the national team was that the better you did as an athlete, the better program you would get moved into. And so it was like, as your skill increased, your support would increase and you would get into a bigger and better program. Because park and pipe was so new and because it wasn't yet Olympic and therefore there wasn't as many avenues for funding from governments, there was nothing of any sort from a national program perspective about park and pipe. And there were only a few provinces doing it. Alberta was actually at the forefront at the time. When they formed that park and pipe team and I got named as the coach, it was the highest level park and pipe program in the country. BC was doing a little bit, but not quite as supported as the one Alberta did. So they were ahead of their time there with putting this provincial program together. But as you said, as these athletes improved, and you brought up Mike Riddle, and I use him so often because he was the one athlete that the very first year I started coaching in 2002, Mike was on the team. So he was the one I had coached the longest. And I did coach the longest all the way through until he won a medal in Sochi. But he was such a great example of this guy who's provincial team level, then he gets better, then he gets better. Now all of a sudden he's getting invites to World Cups, to World Championships. He's making finals at US Open, on and on and on. So he's improving. And in any normal traditional sports system, this guy's going to be sweet. You're ready. You've made it. You're no longer a provincial team athlete. You're world class. Let's get you up into the national team, national development team, national team, however it's structured. And there was nothing. There was nothing there for them. And for me, feeling that the best athletes deserve the most support, that really sucked. It's like, hey, what are we doing here? We're helping kids get good enough to quit. We're helping make them good enough to go to a point where all of a sudden they have zero support when they need it the most because they're moving into the most challenging part of the whole system, right? They're going into their biggest challenges and we're just, okay, nice knowing you, I'll have to go have fun. So I just felt so strongly that they deserved a program that would support them, given that obviously they wanted it, right? Because back then too, it was a real wild time. There was a lot of competitors out there. They didn't want, vocally anyways, didn't want coaches or teams or programs, and all that was from the side of the sport that they weren't into. So a lot of skiers out there were really anti-coach, team, whatever. But these guys obviously had been in one and we were having a good time and it was working for them. So they were down with it. I knew they liked being on the team, the way we were operating and having the support I was giving them. So it just felt to me like this is just tragic that there's nowhere for them to go except just off on their own with no support. And right around those times, that was when I had been approached by Sarah for the 2005 World Championships. Most of the athletes that went to 05 World Championships were the Alberta team kids I was coaching. So I went as the coach. And then there was also Sarah and Corey Vanuler, who were the other two Canadians who weren't on the Alberta team, but also got invited to Worlds. And it was a real funny conversation with Sarah, I remember, because I'm like, I feel sort of awkward even asking you if you want coaching because you're the best in the world. And I'm not at all implying that you might need it.
Right.
But if you'd like my help, let me know. Anything I can do to help. And she was like, yeah, great. I'd love it. I'd love some help. So that was the first time I really coached her. She won the comp and she had reached out to me at the end of that season. And she sent me this really cool email. I probably still have it somewhere. She's like, I was wondering if I could join the Alberta team. I'm not from Alberta, but I really enjoyed being a part of that group and having help at a comp. So she just really liked that experience of all of a sudden having a bit of a program behind her in a comp. And I had pitched it to Alberta about like, hey, yes, she's not from Alberta, but the benefits of having the best in the world as part of your team to train with is just priceless. We got to figure out how to do this. They were cool. They allowed it to happen. So yeah, now I had this Alberta team that wasn't even all Albertans anymore.
Right.
And we weren't doing anything that a provincial ski team should do. We were off going to X Games and World Championships. Provincial ski teams should be going to the Southern Alberta Cup and the Junior Nationals, right? And things like that. So it just wasn't working for the association. And I completely understand that perspective. But eventually they said, look, this is so cool what you're doing. I don't know these stats, but I'm pretty confident that no provincial ski team has ever reeled in as many World Cup and World Championship medals as we did. So that was pretty cool. We're this Alberta team just bringing home crystal globes for winning the World Cup overall and stuff. And they were so supportive of what we were doing, but they're just like, this just isn't sustainable. What do we do now with the kids, the top kids from our clubs? They're like, we can't put them on the Alberta team anymore because you guys are traveling the world at these big events. And so they needed a provincial team that fit the next stage of development for those athletes, which, as I said, it kind of sucked for us because all of a sudden They're like, look, you just can't keep doing what you're doing.
But didn't you keep doing that and kind of start it like a bike team almost, where you tried to work with Octagon to get some sponsors? I don't know if that ever worked out, but that's how it had to be, was you guys needed to graduate from that Alberta team to give these guys a chance to be at those big events with people that are pushing them at all times.
Exactly. I was sort of given the choice from Alberta. They said, look, you can pull the team back to a little more of a provincial level program and schedule and go to these other events and stuff, or we just can't really support it anymore. And while I understood it, I was like, yeah, look, I'm not going to tell Mike Riddle he's got to go to junior nationals instead of the US Open. Like, there's no way. This doesn't work for these athletes. And my desire was how to support these athletes the best. These guys are the best. They deserve the most support. How do we give that to them? So that was when we just said, look, super grateful to Alberta the whole time. Thank you so much for supporting us. We're just going to have to go our own way and just figure out how to do this on our own at this point. And that was when, we reached out to Bob Klein at Octagon because they had just formed a collection.
Yeah, the snowboarders did the same thing, but they did it because they wanted to. It wasn't like they were forced to. You went to Octagon because you guys needed to raise funds to make this shit happen for yourselves, because you were starting something from scratch that had never been done before. So it was more dire, I would think, in your area than the snowboard guys who were just doing it because they didn't like the rules.
Yeah. For us, it was like, well, I just really want to keep doing this and supporting these guys, but it costs money. How are we going to do it? There was at least 1 year where I sort of just did the whole thing on my credit card going, well, we'll figure it out later, and just not sure how this is working. And in Alberta, they had a really cool executive director at the time, and he was still kind of helping to try and get us some little one-off fundraising things here and there and support us, in a sort of disconnected way, but get us something. And then what really saved both that program and my coaching career in the park and pipe world was some of the athletes getting together and some of their parents, in particular, Roz's parents. They were the most active in kind of getting organized and pulling together a little bit of a fundraising sponsorship platform deck thing. They helped us design and print this little thing. And then they had connections within the business world. And so the parents were sort of all of a sudden getting behind and shopping for sponsors for us. And it was never really a sponsorship in that no one showed up and made people wear a uniform or put a sticker on anything. It was more, I guess, corporate donation style stuff. But they were quite successful. They pulled together enough money to, basically the money was to pay me.
Yeah, for sure. You need to be able to eat.
Yeah. So it was all the athletes and them paying money themselves to pay me, and then the parents banding together to help fundraise extra money so that paying for me wasn't entirely all the athletes' cost. So it was this real group effort. Just eternally grateful.
It's time for my final sponsor break, and I'm going to start off with Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, and they're always giving something away. This week, it's something I wear almost every day. Peter Glenn is giving away 2 pairs of 686's incredible anything or everywhere pants that will keep you comfortable and stylish this winter. 2 lucky winners will receive their choice of an anything cargo pant or an everywhere pant from 686. Enjoy these durable, flexible, anytime, anywhere pants from 686 and Peter Glenn. Entry is easy. Head on over to Peter Glenn Sports on Instagram and follow the directions on their giveaway post, which will include following Peter Glenn Sports and 686 on Instagram, liking the 686 giveaway post, and tagging 2 friends in the comments that would look great in these pants. The winner will be selected on Friday, October 8th, and remember, only 1 entry per person. Good luck. Next up is Rollerblade. And while they've been sold out of a lot of products due to the inline craze that started again in 2020, new product is coming and it's time to snatch it up. If you already have your blades, you know ski season is right around the corner. But are you ready for it? You can be. Head on over to the App Store and search for the Rollerblade Skate to Ski app. There you'll find the best practices of using your skates to get you ready to carve up the mountain. It's free, it's fun, and you can either download the app or get the details about it over at rollerblade.com. I'm saving the best for last, and there's no better brand to work with in action sports than the 10 Barrel Brewery. And how can a beer be part of action sports, you ask? Well, they do more than most brands do. They sponsor a team of world-class skiers, skaters, and bikers. They produce movies around the team. They sponsor important events, throw their own events, whatever, you get it. And what I'm loving the most about 10 Barrel lately is their new Pilsner. It's so light, crisp, and tasty. Next time you're at the store, pick up a 6-pack of 10 Barrel's Pilsner, and I bet it becomes one of your new favorite beers. To find out more about all things 10 Barrel, head on over to 10barrel.com. Those are my sponsors. Now let's get back into the podcast. What you were doing was working. Sarah came in and she was already dominant, so we can kind of not really look at her performance, but you look at someone like Justin Dory who comes to you, and he's a kid who's like a tank, a powerful skier who can always make finals, but he could never hold it together in finals. He was always blowing up, and he was never a podium guy. But then his first year on your program, he ends up in the top 5 in pretty much every contest he enters, with some podiums and some wins. And whatever you're having them do differently is working, and you're giving these guys confidence. So I can see where all the parents are making things happen for you. But one skier that I want to talk about, because I had a little relationship with him, was Matt Hayward. And I was trying to get him on the K2 team at one point, and it was such a process because it seemed like he was one of those guys who had so much talent, but he wanted nothing to do with the business of skiing. It almost seemed like he didn't even want to talk about skiing when I talked to him on the phone. He could have been great, but it was a strange one to me. What happened to him?
Well, I don't know what time you were talking to him, but he had some massive sponsorship conflict go down. He was on contract with the ski company, and then it wasn't working for him, and he wanted to break the contract. And I always tried to stay out as much as possible of any of the athletes' business deals, because of like, oh, that could just get super messy, right? Me jumping in between athletes and sponsors. So I would poke my nose in when there were performance issues, like Atomic not making a good enough ski for Riddle when they had a racer and that could make the best skis in the world. So shit like that. When it was a performance thing, I had no qualms about diving in and making waves. But with the athlete's personal business side of stuff, I tried to stay out of it. So I would tell you more about Matt's big ski sponsor conflict, but I don't know the details. I just know he was really upset, like kind of on the verge of tears about it a few times.
I think that's when I was dealing with him, because he was definitely unhappy with some things, and K2 was going to be his escape route, I feel like, but it just didn't work out somehow.
Yeah, and so that was a really, really negative experience for the poor guy. And I'm sure, as in any conflict, there must be another side to it, but I hadn't been as tied to the other side, so I don't really know it. And I sure felt for Matt, just given that he was so damn distressed by the whole thing. And it seemed to derail him in that he just was dwelling on this negative stuff going on a lot. And did that in particular play a huge part in him wrapping it up? It's hard to say. I don't really know that. But he was great, man. Matt was one of the funnest guys to coach, and just a wonderful human. So nice, right? I remember driving through Salt Lake City and he would, hey, stop. So he could give $1 to a guy on the side of the road, you know, homeless guy, things like that. Just a great, kind, generous kid. Huge punk troublemaker side to him too.
Huh.
I mean, the kid egged this guy out of the 7th story in Whistler once, and the guy went into such a rage that they had to bring the cops to restrain him, and they ended up tasering the guy and putting him in jail for the night.
Oh,
that
man.
was a good story. But yeah, he was good, man. He did the first 12s in the pipe. I remember the Canadian aerials team coaches were trying to get him, like, oh, that kid, he showed up at the ramps and did better in the day than half of our prospects have in months. And everyone recognized his talent. He did win a Crystal Globe, won some big events. So he had a great career.
And then I'm not sure the full progression here, but I'm going to guess that a national team is established right around the time that the sport is named to the 2014 games. Do you remember the moment you find out that halfpipe is in the Olympics?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm probably going to get the date or month wrong, but I think it was probably May 2011. Or would it have been 2010? It was right after the Vancouver games.
How did it not end up in Vancouver? Because they could have pushed for it and they could have gotten it in Vancouver, and they didn't.
They absolutely could have. And all the reasons they gave me for why they couldn't were bullshit. And I'm pissed to this day at everyone who didn't fight harder for it. I was mad at the Canadian Association because I felt they could have pushed harder. I don't know if they either didn't truly believe that they wouldn't have been successful had they pushed harder. They certainly know the ins and outs of the politics of the sport more than I do, or certainly did back then. But the reasons FIS were giving us were just this bureaucratic bullshit about oh, look, it's adding a new sport to the games. It's this big process. There's all these certain steps and criteria that have to be met. And that's just the way it is. It's the machine and we're within it. And without all these things in place, the sport can't gain entry to the games. And so there were things like there had to have been a certain amount of world championship events and just all this shit they were telling us. And the reason now in particular, I'm so confident that it was all bullshit is right around the same time ski halfpipe was named to the Olympics, slopestyle was also named to the Olympics. And slopestyle hadn't even really been proposed by most of the powers that be or the national associations. My understanding is that FIS went to the IOC and said, hey, we're finally submitting ski halfpipe. Can we be an Olympic event? And IOC was like, yeah, what about slopestyle? Why aren't you submitting that too? And they're like, oh, shit, we could do that? Really? Yeah, okay, let's do slopestyle too. And so slopestyle got in at the same time as us. And the reason I'm so wound up about all that is slopestyle hadn't met any of the criteria that they told us were the reasons ski halfpipe hadn't gone in for Vancouver. They hadn't had a world championships yet. There's all kinds of the shit that we were told just was a black and white necessity to get into the games. And then I'm like, you just broke all those rules.
All of them for ratings. They're like, wait, this is what's going to sell and we're going to put this shit in here now.
Yeah. And obviously it's like, great. Slopestyle should have been in the games too. Like, good on you for finally waking up. But yeah, we spent years pre-Vancouver just fighting our ass off. Sarah in particular put so much of her time outside of working on her own skiing to just lobbying for the sport and lobbying not only for the sport's inclusion in the Olympics, but then for women's representation at the sport at other levels.
You could look at her as probably one of the most influential skiers of our time in terms of not only her ski ability, but the things she was fighting for behind the scenes. There aren't many other skiers that actually go out of their way to really fight to make a difference, and she did all the time.
Oh, 100%. Who knows where the sports would be without her, And I remember after she passed, I think it was Jeff Schmuck wrote an article about her, and the one line that he wrote that just stuck with me forever is she was our queen. She was.
Yeah.
That just hit it so perfectly there.
And we are not going to spend too much time talking about sad things about Sarah because we could easily do that. She was one of your best friends and you lost her, and that sucks. And the whole ski industry and friends, family, so many different people lost such an important person. We are going to talk about the founding of the national team, and that's how you transition a weird, awkward, sad conversation into talking about a weird national team. But are you named the head coach? Like all of a sudden you go from this traveling elite athlete dirtbag team to proud national team members like overnight?
Overnight. It was so funny, man, because now we'd been doing our own thing as we called ourselves the Canadian Halfpipe Team, right? We weren't the quote national team because we were not supported by any national organization. We were just the Canadian team. And yeah, we had been doing really well, right? We had Sarah, we had Riddle, Roz, Hayward, Dory, just on and on. It was a powerhouse program. And as soon as Olympic inclusion happened, I right away get a call from David Marotta, who was the high performance program director at Freestyle Canada at the time, Canadian Freestyle Ski Association. And I had been in touch with him for quite a long period leading up to this as well, because he, as well as I, had seen this coming for some time. And David and Peter Judge, who was the CEO of Freestyle at the time, they had already, even before the sport was actually officially named, they had done a few things to try and help prep me for the role. They actually invited me on a trip to Sochi in summer 2009 or something. So it was before we were even actually named to the team, but there was a scouting recon trip to Sochi for all the national coaches. And they asked me, they paid for my trip, brought me along because at that time they're like, look, we expect you're going to get named to 2014. We want to start including you. So I already had a rapport with them, certainly with Peter, as he had been the coach back when I first started freestyle. And then I knew Dave from this back and forth. And Dave just called me. I was like, hey, it's in. It's official. Pipe is in the games for 2014. This now opens up our ability to get funding from Canadian sports systems to form a national team. And he's like, lucky for us, we don't have to do any of that because you've already done it. So we can just come in and support you. So basically he's like, what we'd like to do is take your team, name them the national team, and name you the coach. I was like, cool, right on. Okay, great. Then there was this really funny, that saying, careful what you wish for. We had been so mouthy about being pissed off that we weren't getting the kind of support that these other sports were, like moguls and aerials and everything, right? We saw that, especially the financial support they got from the government and things like that. And we were a little brash and mouthy about all of that. And like, we're killing it. We deserve this. We deserve that. And, everyone else gets all this support and we don't. And now all of a sudden they're like, okay, we're here to give you the support. And there's this instant, oh shit, well, what are you going to make us do? Right?
Yeah.
Like it literally went from overnight. We want this, we want this, we want this. Okay, you can have it. Like, oh, well, shit, hang on.
They're
right?
like, here's the uniform, here's this, here's the business card, here's your salary, and here's the list of rules that you guys need to comply with.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And they use that term athlete-centered program, right? It's been thrown around forever. And I just felt like we had such a true athlete-centered program when we were doing it on our own. Because I'm like, man, I work for you, Sarah. I work for you, Riddle. I don't work for anyone else. There's no one telling us what to do except what you guys want. That didn't mean I wasn't sometimes telling them, hey, well, no, you should do it differently. Like I still would try and push them in ways that I thought were going to help them. But ultimately, the relationship was, I just work for you guys. So it was so athlete centered. We were just out there on the road, really driving our own bus with no one pushing us in any direction other than ourselves. And there was a purity to that was so cool, man. And the fact that we were doing well and we were kind of this unique novelty, I suppose, and support because there weren't many other teams or coaches doing it in new school at that time. And so we had this really cool identity. It was a very unique thing and we knew it and we had a lot of pride in it. And then all of a sudden, for this thing to change, it's like, okay, you're about to get everything you've wanted, but at what cost?
Right.
And so we did go through, we had some team meetings, just myself and the athletes, to really go through that and say, well, look, we obviously want this. We've been beaking off about it for years, how much we want it. But what are we willing to accept and what aren't we? What do we want out of this? How's this going to look? And so I'm so lucky, man. And I'm so grateful to, in particular, David Marotta, who was the high performance director at the time. And he was overseeing all the national team programs, moguls, aerials, everything. And Peter Judge was the CEO at the time. And I went to him with just a little bit of this, hey, just so you know, we're really stoked, but we're also all of a sudden instantly concerned. And here's the things that matter to us. And the approach from Dave, it couldn't have been any better, man. He said, I understand that you guys are tremendously successful. We're not here to try and tell you how to do things because obviously what you're doing works. He said, we want to listen to your concerns. Basically, it was kind of like, we're not here to try and turn you into something you're not or tell you to do things you don't want to do. We just want to know how we can support what you're already doing. That was how they came at me.
Can't ask for anything more than that.
We were so lucky that happened. And in large part, it was just the people at the time. You could so easily have had someone different in that role who would have been completely different mindset, right?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, no, if we're putting hundreds of thousands into this program, here's how you got to do it.
They could have not made you the coach.
You got to go to Finland to do this crappy World Cup. You can't go to US, whatever. Yeah, they could have hired someone else. There's a million ways it could have gone, but we lucked out with these people in particular. And so it's like, oh man, we're scoring here because now I've got a really understanding sort of management group above me who is being really cool about this whole thing. And they're like, yeah, okay, no, you guys don't have to wear a team uniform, even though all our other disciplines do. And how's that for an association, right? You got these team sponsors paying the association to get representation of their product. And we're just taking advantage of that funding and not even promoting the product. Like we were scoring, man. They gave us serious leeway. And we needed it because I said, look, especially at that time, I'm like, hey, things like these clothing contracts at the time, this is how these guys make a living. We can't screw with that. So they were understanding, they were accommodating. And then they were like, what do you need? So we were nervous and there was this instant apprehension, but I think they played it as well as they possibly could have as an association. And we got real lucky there. And then the other cool thing was the Canadian Freestyle Organization is an organization who has had huge success on a world stage forever. So I'm like, man, like the collective knowledge on how to win shit in this group above me is huge. So I was like, you guys have produced so many medals and so many successful programs. Like, let me just tap into that and adapt it to our world and tweak it to fit our identity and culture and use it and keep going. So it was awesome. I don't know if I went off on a tangent there or what, but
yeah, no, a little bit of a tangent, but you know what? That's okay. We're not going to talk about much more. I mean, eventually you go to Sochi, Mike Riddle wins the silver medal, and we could talk a lot more about the groundwork to the Canadian team, you having your fingerprints all over that team, other athletes, but we're not going to talk a lot about that because we have our final segment of the show. It's called Inappropriate Questions, and you know all about it. This week, I've got a new person asking the questions. We had Bushfield do it last week. This time it was someone you were hanging out with yesterday, and I kind of got in a pickle the last minute, and I needed to get some inappropriate questions. So I called one of the most important people in skiing, at least one of the guys who ushered in the twin tip movement, the godfather, Mike Douglas, to come up with 3 inappropriate questions. And Mike crushed it. So I am going to play you question number 1 from Mike Douglas right now.
Nice.
Back in the 90s, you kind of got famous after you did something that was seen by tens of millions of people on TV. What was it?
We used to go to Teen France all the time for training competitions.
Okay.
And one year we were over there and they just got hammered by this insane winter storm. It snowed something like 13 feet in 9 days. Is the number that sticks in my head. Just insane. Everything was shut down. They weren't running a single lift because Abbey Danger was so high, of course. And so we were just trapped in this little mountain village in France with snow piling up and piling up. And I remember we went out and tried to hike up the Mogul course and ski at once, which was super stupid, dangerous. We did it. But one day we were down in one of the guys' rooms. We were staying in this big apartment building. We were on the 2nd floor and looked outside and the snow was almost right up to his balcony. And I was like, hey, man, let's jump into that. So we jumped off the balcony into the snow. It was soft as hell. I was like, that was pretty fun. Who do we know on the next floor up? So we were this huge team back then. It was back when it was all freestyle, right? Moguls, aerials, everyone. So we had people all over the building go find one of the other guys. Like, hey, man, 3rd floor. Hey, dude, can I come through your room and jump off your balcony? Yeah, okay, sure. So next thing you know, as we keep going up floors, people keep sort of dropping off. And then at the end, it's down to 2 of us, myself and Ryan Johnson. And we went up. The highest floor in the building was the 6th floor. We get entry to the 6th floor room. Like, all right, man, here we go. Let's send it off this balcony into the snow below. For sure, a bit of a sketchy thing because I thought we knew what was under the snow because we had been there before it snowed, but wasn't 100% certain. But
yeah.
Decided it was cool anyways. So we jumped off this 6th floor balcony into the snow. And I remember I did sort of a crooked branny, so maybe kind of a misty-ish thing, and then over-rotated it because you had to land on your back. Because if you land on your feet, you just go straight through the snow, right?
Yep.
So you had to hit kind of starfish on your back so that you didn't go all the way through. And that one on the 6th floor, I hit hard because it was high, man. Snow was soft, but it was high enough. I like impact, I'm winded, and I open my eyes. It's like, oh shit, can't see anything. I'm under, man. And I start reaching, and my fingertips kind of break through the snow, a full arm length. And then I'm sort of panicking and drowning and scrabble all the snow out of my face. Then I'm good. I can breathe. And it was all awesome. Anyways, someone had videotaped it. And Mike D, actually, he was so much more tuned into these kind of things than all of us. He's like, dude, give me that footage. He's like, I'm sure I can find people who want it. And so he sold it to this TV show called Real TV.
Okay, I remember that.
You remember Real TV? They were
Yeah.
kind of like one of the first reality programs. People just sent in real clips and they aired it. And yeah, their little episode on that was awesome because it's a stupid stunt. They dramatized it so much. I hit the snow and the clip is in Degenerates in the credits. If anyone has an old VHS player, you go back and watch it. You see me, it's filmed from above. So I just go flipping off down, and then I hit the snow and then vanish. There's just bomb hole, nothing. And then they just start playing this unbelievably dramatic music, right? It's like, dun, dun, dun. And the narrator's like, he's suffocating under there. So that was my viral moment before things were going viral, I suppose. And I remember the CEO of Canada Freestyle got all mad at me because it was no longer Peter Judge. It was this other guy who wasn't as open-minded about getting radical. He lectured me about it because I was representing the Canadian team doing stupid stunts. It's like, what do you think our sport is, bro? Come on.
Yeah, really. All right, we will go with question number 2.
All right, Trennon. So I know you're an upstanding Olympic coach now, but I recall a story of you and Mark McDonnell stealing a bike in Europe. Tell us what happened.
Oh, God. When I tell this story, it usually takes 40 minutes because so much shit went down. How do I make it quick? Not make you need a whole nother episode. We're in Germany at a World Cup. The mogul event gets canceled. There's not enough snow. There's a free beer tent.
It always starts with free beer.
Yeah. So Mark McDonnell and I and a whole bunch of other freestylers are really making the most of the free beer tent. We're playing this drinking game with the British aerialist or something. Mark gets so angry at losing the drinking game, he crushes his beer glass just with the force of his anger, his grip, and slices his hand to shit. All these people come running over because blood's going everywhere. They kind of wrap these beer-soaked towels around him. I take him off to the bathroom to try and clean it out and stuff. We come back and they're like, okay, the ambulance is on its way. And we're like, no, we don't want an ambulance. We're in the middle of Europe. It's going to cost money. Screw you. And then they got really mad and they tried to detain us. And so we did this kind of escape move where we dove sideways. It was this giant hall, but it was a tent. It was like a giant Euro beer tent. And we actually dove out under the gap between the tent and the ground while these big dudes in lederhosen were trying to detain us. Like we're kicking our way free. We run off into the night and now we're 20 kilometers away from where we were staying. So we're trying to figure out what to do. And the next thing you know, we're just poking around in people's backyards and garages looking for bikes to get home and all kinds of crazy shit. I could go for 40 minutes on just all of the events during that time.
Okay.
But we did eventually find a bike. We found a couple. It took a few tries. We found one that we thought worked. It had flat tires. We found out later. It also had a pump on the frame that we discovered in the morning that we never used. We just rode the thing back to it. I tried to double mark up a hill. He was bleeding everywhere. We finally got home. Anyways, the next day, we did feel real shitty about stealing a bike. So we went to return it. And we pulled up in this van with basically, it was me perched in the side door of the van with this bike, Mark driving, pull up and there's just people at this place outside in their yard. It's like we screech to a halt. I dive out with the bike. And I'm like, guys, I'm real sorry we took your bike. And I like drop the bike on the ground, jump back in the van, and Mark peels away. So we borrowed a bike.
That's amazing.
A little hectic.
All right, we will jump into Mike's final inappropriate question.
All right, Trennon. So you and I have had the chance to travel around the world a little bit together. And some of my favorite memories are from our trips to Japan back in the 90s. And I remember a phrase that you used to use with the Japanese people all the time. And it was Ninshin-san kagetsu desu. Can you tell the audience what that means and how you would use it?
Oh my goodness, I'm blanking. I remember exactly that phrase. What the heck did it mean? Oh, dude, I got to call my...
Man, I didn't ask him what it meant. I figured you would know.
That is so clear in my mind saying that. And it was some basically inappropriate phrase.
Like take your shirt off or something?
Yeah. Ah, shit. I'm going to Google it the second we get off the phone to try and remember what the hell it means. It was something that was... Yeah, just kind of, I think, sort of slightly off color, inappropriate for the occasion. And I just thought it was hilarious because people would be sort of shocked and laughing anytime I broke it out. So I did it all the time. But I can't remember what the hell it means now. Shit. Sorry, that was a good question, Mike. I apologize if you're listening that my memory has gone that bad in my old age.
Well, with that answer, Mike does have a bonus question. He said it was going to take you a long time to answer it, so I almost wasn't going to play it. But since you didn't answer this last question, I am going to play Mike's bonus question. You're probably going to have to give an abbreviated response to it.
I'll do my best.
Just based on Mike saying it was going to take you a long time. But here we go with Mike's fourth and final question.
You pulled one of the most savage burns on me that I can ever remember on a train. We had just done a mogul demo in Hakuba, and we were on the train back to Tokyo with the Sometimes Cigarettes girls. Tell us how mean you were to me, buddy.
You were mean to the Godfather, man. What'd you do?
Okay, yeah. So quickly, we were doing these mogul demonstrations, and there was this team of beautiful Japanese models, I suppose, that all worked for this cigarette company, Sometimes Cigarettes. And they were out there just hyping their product. It was sort of like whatever, the Monster Girls or something in today's terms, right? It was the Sometimes Cigarette girls, all these beautiful girls, and they were kind of cheerleading at the bottom of the course. And they were super friendly to us. Like every day we'd finish our demo and they thought we were great. And we were all stoked because all these beautiful girls are being so nice to us and thinking we're awesome, right?
Yeah.
And we finished the demo. We get on a train back to whatever city we were going to. And I go for a walk on the train and I get up to a different car and I see all the Sometimes Cigarette girls sitting there. And I go cruising in like, oh, hey, girls. And just the coldest shoulder ever. I instantly realized they were being nice to us because they were being paid to be nice to us. They don't actually think we're very cool at all, it seems like, right? They're just like, yeah, hi, go away. So I'm just like, oh, all taken aback and feeling embarrassed and like, oh, well, geez, I guess we're not that cool after all. So I go back and I'm like, hey, Mike, the other car, I found all those Sometimes Cigarette girls are actually 2 cars up and they were asking about you. Like, you got to go up there, dude. So basically I sent him into certain doom. So he goes in even more confident than I had been because now he thinks that they specifically requested, right, send Mike Douglas to us. And, yeah, he goes in, he's like, hi. He came back. He was so pissed. It was awesome. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's Inappropriate Questions, and it's been an amazing walk through your life and times. I mean, ESPN named you the 46th most influential person in all of action sports.
Holy shit.
Yeah. Which is pretty much most likely for what you've done since like 2002. But really, your life and times are a magical story of like a self-taught mogul dirtbag who not only did well in moguls and made a career for himself, but then you helped change the game of park and pipe skiing, it seems like. So it's an honor to have you on the show, and all of Canada should be thanking you for what you've done for their program, because while you have a ton of elite skiers in Canada, it's like you've channeled them and harnessed their energy to make it a dominant program year after year, which is expected from the Great White North. So I thank you for your time, and that's our podcast.
Thank you so much, Mike, and thank you for having me. You know, your show is full of just absolute legends, so to be included in that company is a real privilege. I appreciate it.
So that was time with Trennon Paynter, and that dude is such a badass. I mean, he lives his life like a calculated Rory Bushfield, which is amazing in itself. But the dude is old, and he gets radder and looser than most kids and athletes that are 40 years younger than him. And while we don't experience it, and I didn't ask, I'm sure he knows how to be a hard ass at times in order to get the most out of his athletes. I wonder what that looks like, and I will find out one day when I have someone like Riddle on the show. But what a fun conversation with a dude that loves to tell a story. That's the podcast. Now it's time for the review of the week, and this week it's a 5-star review that comes from Mini-Me, and it's titled Spot On. Here's the review. What a great selections of legends and legends to be. The amount of research that Mike does on his guests is amazing, and I think the guests are often amazed by that as well. Keep up the good work. Well, Mini-Me, thank you very much for that review. It's one of my simple pleasures in life when my guest is blown away by how I get some of the information about them. There's nothing that makes me happier than when they say, how the hell did you even know that? And I hope to get that in the episodes to come. I feel like I've gotten it a ton throughout the podcast since it's been going for 5 years. And I thank you for your review. Now, all you need to do is send me an email at mike@thepowellmovement.com, and I will send you a limited edition Powell Movement beanie. Listeners, if you would like to get a limited edition Powell Movement beanie, yes, you can buy one on my website, but why buy one when you can submit a review of the week, and that will get you a free beanie if I read it on the podcast. For anyone that wants to play this game, please put a review on iTunes, or if you do it somewhere else, email me a link to that review at mike@thepowellmovement.com. If I read it on the show, then you send me an email with your shipping address and I send you that limited edition Powell Movement beanie. If you are outside of the US, I've mentioned it before, but I am too cheap to ship internationally, and the paperwork is a total pain in the ass. But if I read your email on the show, I'll ship a beanie to a friend of your choice who lives in the United States. So, while I'm cheap, I will still honor my word in sending a beanie out to someone who writes an awesome review and I read it on the show. At this point, I want to thank everyone for listening, and I want to ask you to buy stuff from my sponsors. I only work with the best, and they are Alpine Vans, Stanley, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Dragon, the 10 Barrel Brewery, and Rollerblade. Have a great week, everyone.